Welcome to the Migrant Mentor, where dreams know no borders and inspiration speaks every language. I'm Suraj, and together with my father, we're excited to bring you the powerful stories of migrant entrepreneurs who've ventured far from home to build their dreams. While I'll be your guide, the lessons and insights come from both of us, shared across generations. So, let's get inspired by these incredible journeys of success and the practical advice that has propelled these entrepreneurs to where they are today. It's time to start our session of learning and inspiration. So, what's my background and why are we starting this podcast? I got my entrepreneurial flair back in high school. I saw dad starting businesses and investing in businesses, and I really liked the idea of mixing technology with business. So I think my friend and I were in IT class or commerce class, and we discovered the word dropshipping. We really liked the idea of buying things super cheap from China and selling it on eBay. So we decided to buy 200 iPhone 4 cases at about $3 or $4. We popped a listing on eBay and sold it for $30. I think we ended up selling 10 or 11 cases, and the rest of them sat in the garage for many years, which Mum absolutely loved. But that really set the foundations for my lifelong passion of entrepreneurship. Since then, I've done 4 tech startups in various industries, including cloud computing, finance, advertising, and gaming. I've raised over $700,000 in both private and government venture capital or funding for some of those startups. I helped a friend's business, which was combining virtual reality with real estate marketing, go from 5 employees to 55 globally, which was an amazing journey in itself. Beyond my startup experience, I've worked for companies like Oracle, Apple, WorkPerfect, helping people and businesses improve the way they work, play, and live using technology, whilst lecturing part-time in entrepreneurship, business intelligence, and social media strategies. So, why are we doing this podcast? I think both Dad and I have been really fascinated with stories of people whose definition of success challenges the conventional. I've always been inspired by the failures and triumphs of those who dare to think differently about success and entrepreneurship. So Dad and I really wanted to share these insights, these stories, the successes, the mistakes, the failures, the triumphs with other entrepreneurs in hopefully inspiring them to start their own journeys. Now I'm going to introduce Dad. Dad, welcome to our Father and Son podcast.
Thank you, Suraj. Great to be here.
For our listeners, it'd be great if you gave us a bit of a background of yourself and your story and journey for being in entrepreneurship.
Great. Yeah, look, so I originally was born in India. My father was in the UK, and so like a lot of people in those days in the 70s, 60s and 70s, we went to the UK. So I grew up there and a migrant at that stage, very tough as always. So we went through schooling. I did my engineering, worked for a company called Siemens, Plessey Defence Systems in the UK, and then worked on some exciting projects. Met some Australian guys there, who then encouraged me to come to Australia. And so I've been here for now 30 years, and it's been a great experience for me. It's entrepreneurship really was always part of the DNA, I suppose, to always, explore, never been one for sort of that simple one job for life kind of mindset. So I was always wanting to explore new things, and hence I came to Australia 30 years ago.
And if you could sum up your key highlights over the last 30 years of your entrepreneurship journey, what would they be?
So I think basically the opportunity to do a lot of these entrepreneurial activities when I was actually working. And now this is often an issue for a lot of people, is that the discussion or the debate between, do I move from corporate world, which pays me a 2 weekly salary, to entrepreneurship? I was actually lucky in that regard, which was a highlight for me, that all the roles that I did, whether it be at Telstra, Westpac, state government, always had that entrepreneurial angle to it, new innovation, technology, emerging technologies. And so I was quite lucky in that regard that I had those sorts of roles. And for me, it was great because I could experience entrepreneurship while being paid the 2 weeks. And then when I felt it was the right time, I moved out and actually then went on to entrepreneurship and then set up a number of startup businesses along the way.
And if we go back to, your roots in London, what age were you when you decided, what was that factor that said to you, you know what, it's time for a move away from London and go to another country?
So as I was growing up, it was always one of those things that I felt that my grandfather went from India to Africa. My father went from India to Africa and then subsequently went from Africa to the UK. And the UK was perfect. There was nothing wrong. I mean, it wasn't a place where we were actually starving or it was a war-torn country. It's a modern, it was a modern Western country. So there was nothing wrong with it in that regard. I just wanted to do something different. I just wanted to take a challenge on. I just wanted to, see what moving to a new country looks like. And so I suppose it was, hey, let's do something different and then follow on the footsteps of my ancestors and do something different. That was really sort of the main driver. And that I had the option of coming to Canada or going to Canada or Australia. And I picked Australia mainly because of I suppose, the climate. That was probably the main reason to move to Australia.
And why not America? Because I always think to myself, you had this entrepreneurial flair, and 30 years ago, Australia didn't really have a startup ecosystem, but America's was really booming. Why didn't that come into mind?
So I did try that. I went for 3 weeks from the UK, from London to the US, across the US to just explore and meet people. However, at that point in time, it was actually quite hard to get residency in the US. I did try a few options, but Canada and Australia were offering them for professionals. So the first entry was, as a professional, because I had an engineering degree and I'd worked for at that time 2 or 3 years in a reputable company. So it was an easier way to get into these countries. So that was the option.
And when you first came to Australia, I think we were in Brisbane. How did we go from Brisbane to Sydney in terms of the move? What made you move from Brisbane to Sydney?
So whenever a new migrant comes to any country, and we'll talk for Australia, is that you have to look for work and cash flow immediately. So I ended up meeting somebody who was a manager at Kmart up in one of the stores in Brisbane. And he obviously had 30 years earlier than me struggled and saw how it was hard for migrants. And so he offered me a role. And he said, why don't you work in the docking area of Kmart? I think it was in North Brisbane. I forget the exact name, but and he was good enough, right? So and then I got a role there for a few days a week, and I kept on applying. Unfortunately, at that stage, Brisbane was still a very small town and didn't always have the engineering or electronics kind of opportunities. And so I applied to Sydney and managed to get a role at Aristocrat Leisure Industries. They offered me a contract role, which was my first professional job. And it really got us going, right? So that's very important. Every migrant comes to any country and you need some cash flow, hopefully in the field that you've been educated in. So that's where your passion is. And it makes life a lot easier. And luckily, it was a very lucrative role that I had initially. And then after that, I then worked for a company called KeyCorp for 9 months. And again, that was a very much an entrepreneurial company. And I learned a lot from John Wood, who was the CEO at the time, and I still have contacts with him, a great guy. I moved to Telstra, and again, I had new product development, new innovation roles while I was there as well. So it was really struggling at the start. Luckily, I had the power of English, and I say this to everyone, is that you've got to make sure that your communication skills are spot on, and if it's not, then you've got to keep practicing. And that's one big advice I give to my students at the moment. When I see a lot of new international students come to Australia, is that they've got to practice their English and communication skills.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I still remember when you were working at Telstra and you always brought new gadgets and new toys, and being a kid, it was awesome playing with those toys. So I think that kind of opened up the door for me to really love technology and be passionate about technology. I mean, coming back to our roots, Where did you get that entrepreneurial flair? Because, between Indians, we always joke that Gujaratis are very business orientated, but granddad was a carpenter, wasn't he? Where did that come from for you?
Yeah, look, so your granddad was a carpenter, and then my granddad, before your great grandfather, was a mason or a laborer. But their entrepreneurial risk-taking spirit of leaving friends, families, communities, villages, get on a ship for 3 months to get to Africa in those days. It was all part of the British Empire. And so that sort of risk-taking came from my granddad. And then, of course, your granddad went to the UK with £10 in his pocket, and no one else really to help him out except for his aunt who was living there. And at 22, 23, he ventured out alone, and really toughed it out. So I think that was, I actually got inspired from him as well. And even though he was a carpenter and a bricklayer and stuff like that, he saw a tough life, and so we grew up in that tough life, and having scarcity around us forces you to think differently.
And do you think, but where do you get that hustle? Because even today, when you've done your startups, when you've had a successful career, now you're lecturing, you're still pursuing startups, you're still pursuing innovations. Where do you think that drive that you've had pretty much your whole life, and now that I have, where do you think that comes from?
I think it's a desire for lifelong learning, right? You should never be stagnant. I know too many friends at the moment in my life who've been in one role, one company for 10, 15, 20 years, and all of a sudden they're in their 50s or 60s, and they realize and wake up and they realize that, oh my God, I don't have a job tomorrow. What am I going to do with myself? And so they have restricted their opportunities in later life. And later life, I think, is so important, that you have so many opportunities. And that's what I did when in my 30s, is that I always constantly looking for new things to do, always taking on things, saying yes to things, and saying, yes, I'll do a job, I'll do a project, and then figure it out later on. And so that desire, that lifelong learning, that be a sponge for knowledge, know knowledge. The other thing is be networking out there all the time. Do networking, meet different people, develop credibility with different people, and highest level of integrity amongst people is going to be absolutely vital for you. And so my desire to learn, make a difference, I think, as well, knowing I can wake up in the morning and make a difference every day, is what drives me.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you think your first few businesses taught you those things? What was the first venture what was that first point when you came to Australia, when you came to Sydney? I remember we had some products in the house. I think you were selling knives or something like that. How did it all begin, that entrepreneurial journey at the start?
So I was working at Telstra at that time. And, obviously there was a mortgage to be paid and 2 kids to feed and send to school. So I couldn't leave the full-time job. So I felt, let's try something. In that era, there wasn't a lot of friends and family around that could help you. It was actually quite hard to then just leave your job and you had, two little kids to feed and send to school and a mortgage to pay off. So then doing a side hustle. And quite rightly, I explored different options, and one of them was importing a cutlery from India and then seeing if I could sell it here. So we started that journey with a friend here who was also very interested in doing something on the side. So we started that for a few months. We made quite a few sales, actually. But one of the learnings was that in that era where there was no WhatsApp and internet and phone easily being able to phone internationally, that trying to communicate things to them was actually hard. So we ordered one thing and we ended up getting another thing. And at the end of it, decided that wasn't going to work. A little later on, about 2003-04, when I was at Westpac, again, same thing, same desire, wanted to do something else and change the status quo. So then I embarked on some friends and advising them who were entrepreneurs themselves, and they wanted me to be there to support them. and that was a camera capturing business, which we were involved in for a little period of time. Fortunately, and I wasn't involved in a big way with that, but it was an opportunity for me to learn about tech startups and how that would work as well. So I learned a lot at that era. And one thing I learned actually at that instance was that, you've got to have a really powerful team with you. If you don't have a powerful team that's really absolutely dedicated to the whole concept of vision, what you're trying to put together, it's going to be hard. And so that's when I ended up with my first investment in 2005, again, while at Telstra. The whole idea here was this was an SMS business, and I was working in that space at Westpac. So I said, you know what, this sounds like a good idea. And the SMS and the mobile phones whole technology was really growing. So we were at the cusp of massive growth at that time. So I made an investment, and if I look back, it was obviously a wrong investment, but that's what entrepreneurs do, right? You make investments, you lose, you learn. Sometimes you make small investments, sometimes you make big investments. Unfortunately, in this instance, I made a bigger investment, and even to this day, 20 years on, or 19 years on, I actually wonder why I made such a big investment, but hey, that was life.
Yeah, and I think, coming back to the personality and the drive, do you think, I think that entrepreneurs are, over time, you learn things and you gain those insights and something sparks you and you think, okay, I'm going to venture out on my own. But do you think it's a personality trait to be an entrepreneur, or do you think it's a learnt behavior from parents, from being in an environment around friends that are doing entrepreneurship? Because I've always been fascinated. Obviously, I have influences of you. I've got my friends that are very entrepreneurial. So I've grown up around that. Do you think, if you're lecturing today and you're talking to your students, how many of them actually have that drive or that personality to really be an entrepreneur? Because it's not easy being an entrepreneur.
No, it's not easy being an entrepreneur. It needs a mindset. It needs people around you. I run innovation entrepreneurship courses at university at an executive MBA level, very senior people. And I asked them at a class of maybe 30 students, how many of them would be willing to give up their weekly paycheck? And most of them don't put their hands up. It's because there's a fear factor involved in there. They're happy with their $200,000 or $300,000 salary, and that's a compelling reason not to leave. But I think there's to your original question, I think there's two parts of it. It's an innate DNA. You've got to have that risk-taking capability, a desire to do something different, a desire to make a difference in the world, to grow yourself in some way, and it comes with risks. I mean, I have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, both in actual investments and loss of income because of not earning while I was running startups. So it does come with a cost. There's no question whatsoever. But if you do enough of these, it could get better, right? In fact, it does get better, and it has got better for me. And so I think it's a combination of your own DNA, hanging around the right people. If you hang around the right people and your DNA doesn't let you take risks or doesn't let you be creative, not going to make a difference. So I think it is a combination of your own DNA to be entrepreneurial, and then hanging around the right people will give you the spark to then explore new opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I always appreciated. Most of our family friends, or Indians, Chinese, or Asians in general, I think a lot of them, the traditional way and the safe way and the comfortable way is to become a doctor, be an accountant or lawyer. When you were doing your engineering degree, what made you kind of go, no, I want to take a different path in that first 10 years, 15 years?
I think first of all, it was, you need to settle down, have a family, have your own house. I think that they're all important things, right? Because they're all part of your life. Career is one thing, but family is also another important thing. It's also, my wife was always helpful. That was, one of the good things. So your mum was always there with me. She didn't always understand, the shenanigans I was up to, but she was there with me, supporting. In fact, If I put my success and where I am today, it's probably because she's been behind me and supporting me, not always understanding everything, but she was there. I mean, you and your younger brother, while I was often traveling, she was looking after you guys and taking you to wherever you needed to do to make sure you had a good life growing up as well. So having that there is very important. But I think hanging around the right kind of people is very important. Now, a lot of people don't do that. Like you said earlier, people are just happy with the 9 to 5, have the weekend off, go on holiday for 2 weeks, a couple of times a year, come back and do the same thing. My only concern with that approach, and I can now prove it, is that if you do that for too long, you become stagnant and you get to your 50s and 60s and then you wonder what you've done with your life. You may be made redundant and not have the options at that stage. What I've done is I've moved around, I've done different things, different repertoire, different angles to my capabilities, which means that even in my mid-50s, I've still got so many options to me. And that's what's really important with entrepreneurs, is you've got to have options. Entrepreneurs create options. That's, I think, the important thing. Whereas a 9 to 5er probably will run out of options. In this day and age, when you get to sort of your mid-50s, you run out of a lot of options for many fields and industries and occupations.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, every single successful person always says, or even reading, one of my favorite books, and even to date, a lot of people still say Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. In there, one of the last few chapters, he says, you are an artifact or a character of your 5 closest friends. So I think that does make a difference. I think influences around you do make a big difference. I guess, not knowing anyone when you were here, who are your mentors or influencers, or who did you hang around to kind of keep this spirit of entrepreneurship up?
It's a good question, because there wasn't a lot of people back in 1994. It was only the people I used to go to work with, because there was no social environment. Monday to Friday you go to work, weekends you do the shopping and take the kids and you and well, mainly you at the time, to wherever we needed to go and try and give you what we could give you within the means. So then you've got people at work at that stage, particularly early on, and this is for migrants, is the only people is the people you see at work at whatever time of the day. But one of the things I learned was I was actually quite lucky that I always reported to very senior people, and I learned a lot from them, and I took them as my role models. The way they thought, the way they spoke, the way they went about doing their business is what I learned from them in those early years. And remember, I was only in my mid-20s around that time as well when I first came. So they were my role models at that time. Having mentors and things like that was quite unusual, or there was somebody at Telstra, a lady called Meredith Rogers, who was very keen. And when I asked her to be my mentor at the time, and that was in a corporate environment, she would offer me insights about how to move my career. So this is the other thing I would also suggest. Find yourself a mentor who's 10 years older than you. Hang around with people who are 10 years older than you. Don't hang around only. It's not to say you don't have people at your age. Yes, to hang around with them, but hang around with people who are 10, 15 years older than you. Make them your friends, because you're going to learn a lot of their mistakes and a lot of their tricks that they've seen over the years. And it's not just in your professional life, in your personal life, because your personal life is also, what I've learned, very enriching and can support your professional life in many ways as well. And they help each other, because you need people in your professional life as well as in your personal life who are 10 years older than you. And I've actually been quite lucky that whether it's in my professional life or in my personal life, I've had people who have always been older than me, who saw the mistakes and had wisdom that I could learn from. If I can offer one suggestion, guidance to young people these days, make sure you have, both in your social and your professional life, people who are older than you. You will find it very enriching.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to be interviewing some of those people as we go along with this podcast. So tell us, I guess I wanted to talk about, what would you say your biggest obstacles were, and the learnings from those obstacles, doing these startups? Because I know, coming from SolarGen, where you were Innovator of the Year 2008 and had to, we struggled with that business because we weren't selling enough product, and the reasonings for that and things like that. But what do you think the biggest obstacles have you had over the last 30 years?
So if I look at a lot of my business ventures, it's really been finding the right people, making sure people are hungry, making sure people are doing the job that they do, because everybody won't have income in the side while they venture out. And so, I accept it that people will be doing their Monday to Friday or whatever work, and then doing entrepreneurial businesses on the side. There are so many people who will say, you know what, I switch out at 5 o'clock. So what I look for, and I've learned over the years, is always find people who are hungry to be beyond the 9 to 5, to pick up a phone at 8 o'clock at night, to have a workshop on the weekend. Find the right kind of people who share your dream is probably been one of my biggest learnings over the years. And I've had to delay or close business ideas because I couldn't find the right people. So make sure you hang around. It comes back down to that hanging around the right people, because you cannot do everything for yourself, with yourself, by yourself. You've got to have people around you supporting you and sharing your vision and the passion. So find the right people, older people who have more context than you, who have more wisdom than you.
I've always found that fascinating where, I've gotten burnt out over the years of, every year I get burnt out because I'm pursuing so many different things, full-time work, startups, side hustles and things like that. Where have you, I know early on you were getting burnt out and things like that, but that's obviously a very big topic nowadays, mental health. But where did you, nowadays, you're doing 6 or 7 different things, and even people today ask myself, how do you do all these things? How do you set up a podcast? How do you work full-time? How do you helping startups? How are you lecturing? Where do you think you got that where you're just continuing, you don't stop? Do you think sometimes you do get burnt out at this stage, or are you just more, mentally aware of when you need to take breaks?
So that's a really good question. A lot of people do ask me that. And I have to say that strength comes from my spirituality. And if you look at a lot of the big gurus, management, entrepreneurial gurus in the world, they actually pull you back to that center as well. So if you look at Steve Jobs, he was very spiritual. Bezos, very spiritual. If you take Zuckerberg, very spiritual. And if I look at those backgrounds and some of their biographies, I suppose mine is no different. I draw a lot of strength from my spirituality, the service I do at my temple, helping people. I draw a lot of strength from them and inspiration from them. Actually doing service is there's no theoretical formula for this, but it's a spiritual. Some things can't be explained by science. That's when spirituality comes in. So I get a lot of my strength from there. I do my daily, mantras and rosaries and evening prayers and etc. And I actually find that helps me. There was a period in my life, particularly the Solar Gem days, which was the lowest of my low period, when I was being hit by all losses. And I felt there was that spirituality. It was my mantras that kept me going, because there's so much power. And in fact, if you read Steve Jobs' book, him spending time in the Himalayas when he was going through a bad time, it was those mantras that gave him a lot of strength. So, it doesn't matter what kind of spirituality, just something is going to give you power. And it's a strange way, but Deepak Chopra, actually, many of his books, and I'm a big fan of his and his work, Deepak Chopra actually says that you've got to bring spirituality into your life. That gives you half the strength for what you do, and it gives me half the strength. And I do see a lot of people who ask me the question, and all I say is, well, these are the few things that I sit back on, because they're my strength.
And don't you think that's, again, coming back to a personality trait, don't you think that's a bit of a personality trait where, a curiosity is creating that mindset? Because, there's been times where I've been burnt out, or I've been, fatigued or exhausted. I can't even get out of bed because we're doing so much. But over the last few years, as I've matured, I've looked to do more yoga, more meditation, more focus on myself and my well-being. But it's been a search for that. I've been searching for those things to balance my hustle, my hunger for entrepreneurship, but also have that right balance of mental health and focus and not being burnt out. Do you think, again, that's a personality trait of curiosity, or it's just the mindset as well, the personality within that person to do it themselves?
So I think there is a curiosity. However, I was lucky, and I got this from my parents and my granddad. So being involved in the organization, the spiritual organization I'm involved in, I didn't have to search for it, right? It was there for me, and I embraced it. And all the love that comes, all the knowledge that comes, and all the strength that gives me, I didn't have to search for it. Steve Jobs had to go searching for it. Zuckerberg had to go searching for it because that wasn't part of their DNA. I had it given to me through my parents, and I embodied that in my way of life, and I kept on learning about that. About more things about that faith, and that spirituality grew on me. And like I said earlier, it's those various mantras that really did help me, and then I researched more about those and saw other people who were going through difficult times and used the same mantras, and it was giving them strength. So it wasn't just yoga and meditation, it was mantras, it was stories, spiritual stories of various journeys of various people that I learned a lot and gave me strength. And that, even now, I do that today. And it still drives me and gives me a lot of energy and oomph in the morning as well.
And what would you say over the career? What would you say your biggest learning? I won't say failure, because as entrepreneurs, failure, we learn from our failures. But what do you think, from the biggest obstacle or biggest challenge you had was the learning that you applied to future startups, future projects, future things in your life?
So one of the things I learned was, and it's always hard to, but if you have to stop a business, stop it. Do not continue draining it and detach yourself from it. And again, this is where the spirituality comes from, is detaching from the results. So if you read the Bhagavad Gita, for example, that talks about detachment, and Deepak Chopra actually leans on the Bhagavad Gita to give you that explanation. So if anybody's interested, please refer to that. But it's detaching. If something doesn't work, and I've had to close 3 or 4 projects which I thought were really powerful, could change the world, make a big difference, and we had keep on hitting roadblocks, and we got to a point where we said, okay, you know what, we're going to have to move on. Solar Gem, as you quite rightly say, I was the Australian Innovator of the Year for 2010, won the Australia's Tech 23 Award for that in the same year. I spilt my guts out in that business, and really I didn't walk away with a great deal, except for I learned so much about entrepreneurship. And of course, now I have a book on Amazon Kindle called The Spiritual Journey of an Entrepreneur from that. So the trick is seeing the silver lining in every cloud. There was learnings. I could not be standing in front of executive students to teach them MBA and innovation entrepreneurship if I did not have that experience. So that's the silver lining. So always see the positive in whatever journey you go through, but at the same time, take a call. So recently, through my university spin-outs, I've had to close a couple of projects. That's fine. Move on. Take the learnings, move on, do something different. So that's one of the biggest learnings I've had is there's always a new day, there's always a new project if you keep looking, and guess what, it always happens, always get new projects coming up because of that mindset.
Yeah, I think it's funny because the more startups you do, or the more entrepreneurial things you do, I think you start detaching yourself. My first 2, I was, they didn't work out. I was depressed, I was down. Now, when you're on your 4th or 5th, you can detach from it. I think that was a big learning for me, where I thought, this isn't going the right way. Am I going to be depressed? Am I going to be emotional about it? But nowadays, there's so many opportunities out there. And I think most entrepreneurs would say that. So, I think that was a big lesson for me as well. It's just detaching. But you can only do that once you've failed 4 or 5 times and you know what that journey of failure looks like in itself. I think we should probably get Deepak Chopra on this podcast if we can get him on. When we get enough listeners on this, we'll try to get Deepak Chopra on this podcast. And what about your biggest? I mean, besides my brother and I, what was your biggest success?
So I think obviously being the Australian Innovator of the Year for 2010 was a success, despite the business not being a success. It was an achievement. That was one. I think having a really varied career background. I attribute a lot of the success to that. I'm not a one-trick pony. That's one advice I'd like to give to people, is not to be a one-trick pony, and always have more than different things to offer people. That's the other part of the success. And then the next part of the success, I think, is my spirituality has always been a backbone for me and a big support. And setting up a temple here in Sydney, in Blacktown, probably is a big achievement. And then helping out with the temple in Melbourne, and then Griffith, and etc. Why I think that's important, because I go there when I go on the weekends mainly, and I see so many people with kids coming along and enjoying and holding on to their culture that they brought from India or the UK, wherever it is. And they realize that had they not have had this temple for them, that they may have lost a lot of the culture that that really does bring richness to their lives. And so when I look at these people at Diwali or any other function, Holi or any of these functions during the year, it makes me feel proud that I was able to do this for spirituality, and not only for myself, because it's been a big backbone for me, but for hundreds and literally thousands of people who come to the temple, enjoy the festivities, and also find other people at that temple as well. And they find business contacts, they find personal contacts, they find social contacts at that temple. And I go there thinking, you know what, I was given the opportunity to be part of that, and to really help people. And of course, I've grown as a human being because of that as well. So I think there are a few of my successes.
Would you say the temple was probably one of your biggest successes? Because I still remember, when we first started that, there was about probably 15 people in a room, doing religious activities. And now during Diwali's, we've in our temple in Blacktown, you've got 2,000, 3,000 people coming over the weekend, and you can't even find a car spot. You have to walk a kilometre. So it's that growth, I think, has been massive for the community as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, think of that as an entrepreneurial venture. We started out with a handful of people, and as you know, because you were there playing the musical instruments in those days, at our home, we started out with a handful of people. We migrated to a hall, and then we ended up buying a temple. We bought the one unit, the second unit, the third unit. We used that money to then set up a temple in Melbourne, and now we're constructing one in Griffith in New South Wales. So think of that as a startup. It really was a startup. It needed a lot of time, effort, commitment, sacrifices, not spending enough time with you guys because I was at the temple. But if you look at back now, if that was a startup, a real profit-making startup, we'd be millionaires by now. Because look at the success, as you quite rightly say, you have to walk a kilometre now to just get there for the big occasion. So, but I learned so many things in that I actually now use in my actual profit-making businesses, because how to deal with people, how to pull people together, how to inspire people, how to work in teams, all of those things I learned. And I say to people, always have an extracurricular spiritual or social activity besides your professional activity, because that enriches your life with a different set of skills. So yes, definitely one of the big achievements. And I feel as if I was sent from the UK to come here just to do that and be part of that.
Now, wrapping up the podcast, and I know, we've got so many topics, and we're going to be, over the course of these podcasts, like true entrepreneurs, we said to ourselves, we'll do 3 to validate it and test it, to see how people think about these podcasts, and definitely do a lot more. But if you had to start all over again, what would you do differently?
Look, it's hard to do that, because I've actually gone through various journeys as lots of people do. But I often think to myself, and I look at some of the youngsters coming online who have grouped up together to set up their businesses very successfully. And unfortunately, in that era, when I was here, in that era where there wasn't a lot of migrants, it did take time, and we didn't have a very entrepreneurial community in those days. Now it's very different. is to continue to source people. Now, it's not to say I didn't do it. Of course, we tried a few times. It just didn't work. So, what would I do differently is probably keep looking to find people who had that mindset. Unfortunately, like I said, everybody was paying mortgages and feeding kids. So it was different. So now I do look for people who had that mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset that would help them realize their goals. So that's one thing I would do differently. Second thing that I would do differently is make sure that I have a little bit of cash behind me, which I often didn't, because always busy paying mortgages off. So that was also another thing that I would have, is to look for cash. And again, in that era, particularly in Australia, it wasn't Silicon Valley, so there wasn't that cash available either. So I think, but then having said all of that, I've gone through a journey that I feel, as Deepak Chopra again says, you follow the journey for which you are meant to follow. So I have no regrets. Maybe, the journey for me was to get the base that I've got done, that I have, and then in later life, I can use all of that experience, which is what I do today. So yes and no, I'm following the journey.
Should we cut it there?
Yeah, I think so. That's enough. That's bloody...
Hold on, let me do a recap. Let me just pause for a sec. Yeah, and I think it's been, to recap our first ever podcast, what I've learned from conversations with you is, number one, surround yourself by the right people. I think that's a really important.
Older people as well, really important. I'll tell you what, in London, in the Mandir, I was with Arvind Bhai, Samji, all 10 years older than me.
Yeah.
Here we had Mahendra uncle, Dilip uncle, all of those guys, all older than me. I tell you what,
you have to be around the right people.
You have to be the right people. Yeah, you can't have all your friends at your age, because you're going to pick the same shit up from them.
Yeah.
But you go to somebody who hang around with people who are much older, and I think, what, that's great. I hadn't even thought of that, but hey, you've already done that 10 years ago. So that's a really big learning.
I think, having a mentor, having some influence, I think it's so predominant these days, especially if you come from India and you're going into university here. People have mentors, like you said, that you probably didn't back then. So having the right people around you, having a mentor that's older than you, that's been there, that's done that. And for me, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more, is in startups, when you're doing a startup, is having the right team. I think there's too many elements of having the right team where teams have failed or broken up, which we'll probably get into a little bit more later down the track. But those are the key things for me that I've learned from this podcast. Any final words from you, Dad?
Yeah, look,
anything that you think someone listening to this for the first time will get out of this podcast?
So I think a couple of points or 2 or 3 points I'd like to make is, first, recognize your weaknesses and find people who can back those weaknesses or fill those weaknesses, first thing. Second thing, always have a multiple angles to your life. Don't make it a one-trick pony. In fact, I talk about this in my book as well, from a product point of view, but from a personal skill point of view. Never have one set of skills that you rely on. Always have multiple sets of skills. And then the third point, which has been a big backbone for me, is always have that spiritual angle to you, because that will always give you a lot of strength, mental strength, particularly when the chips are down. You can always turn to that angle. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of people are getting into these challenges, mental challenges at the moment, because they don't have that option. But go back to Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg, all these guys, and so many more who went back to spirituality to get strength from. And so don't forget that. And for many migrants, they already have that in them. Unfortunately, many just lose it for whatever reason. So go back to your roots, because it's your roots that give a tree strength. And so make sure that you go back to those. So they're the 3 or 4 things that I would recommend to people.
Thanks for joining us today on the Migrant Mentor. If today's episode sparked new ideas or inspired you to think differently, remember that these narratives are designed to challenge and encourage you, no matter where you are on your entrepreneurial journey. Until next time, keep pushing forward, stay inspired, and take the lessons learned here to heart. From the Migrant Mentor, thank you for listening.